Welcome to the SmartTechCheck Podcast, hosted by Mark Vina, your home for candid, insightful, and provocative conversations about the smart home, home automation, security, smartphones, PC and console gaming, and much more.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck Podcast. Today is Friday, February 24th, 2023. Joining me for today's podcast are Stewart Wolpin, who scribes for Popular Mechanics, AARP, Techlicious, Investopedia, and other fine publications. And we're also joined by Dwight, the veteran technology journalist for the Houston Chronicle. John Quain and Rob Peguero are on other assignments. I think one is at MWC in Barcelona. And where is John, Stewart? Do you recall?
I don't remember from the email.
He said he was in a philosophy class, but you know John.
Yes. He's taking doctorate courses as well as going for a master's in bioethics. I think one of them is, if I remember correctly.
Yes. He's expanding his mind as he gets older, which I have tremendous.
Instead of the usual hallucinogens.
Well, Dwight, I'm excited to have you on the call. We go back a long way. You know, we've been, friends, I think, since the early 90s when I was at Compaq, and we've stayed in touch still. And I've always enjoyed your columns. And we're going to hit there's one topic we're going to hit right off the bat that I really want to get your insights on, because you and I had some chatter on social media about that. So let me bring up the first slide here. And that is the new Apple HomePods. Are they worth its premium price? And I'll provide my opinion right after we pull you in and get your perspective on this.
Sure. Well, the version of the HomePods that were just released are not all that different in terms of sound from the original HomePods, which were started out at $350, were sold for a few years and then discontinued. And then Apple brought them back, something of a surprise unless you were really paying attention to the weeds of the rumor mill. But the new versions are $300 each. And that probably, if you're syncing up with high-end smart speakers, that probably is not too far off the mark. I think they probably should be about $250 each. Mm-hmm. But one is not enough. And I almost think Apple is being disingenuous selling them individually, because one sounds good. And I don't know a lot of people who are going to buy one HomePod for use with like Siri and maybe, as a Bluetooth speaker, because it doesn't work with anything other than your iPhone. But if you have two, it is like an amazing experience. It's quite good. It probably rivals sound bars and speaker systems that run in the $500 to $600 range. But one is just not enough. Mark, you bought one, I think. You got hold of one. And that isn't the experience you need to have. I've been using it both for listening as well as for home theater. And for home theater, with an Apple TV 4K, and that's what you have to use it with home theater, it is really a stellar experience. There's one of the things I really love is soundtracks that have kind of a low bass rumble in the music, and you feel it in the room. It's really fantastic, and I think two is worth it at the price. I wish they were $500 for two instead of $600, but one for $300 I don't think is worth the price. I think it really is a two-speaker experience.
Yeah, my experience, and I have to be fair to Apple, is that, and I think you would violently agree with this, is that when it comes to buying smart speakers or just speakers for your home, you have to make a determination: are these for the entertainment center, for your TV? Are they for playing music? Or are you using it with your productivity workstation like I am? And my chief complaint was not the quality. The quality was quite good. I did not use them in a pair, and I'll take your word for it. I'm sure they're tremendous. My problem with them is that they don't have there's not a direct line out. So I really just want, and I would have probably gladly bought a pair had they had some type of line out feature or even some type of optical connection, because when I use a speaker, I use them for my Zoom calls and conference calls, and you get a little bit of latency, and it's actually better it's reduced latency in comparison to the first generation, because I think they're using a new processor in these new HomePods, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they're using one of their proprietary chips for the connection.
Yeah. So in all fairness to Apple, my problem is I was probably trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, that kind of thing, and probably wasn't fair. Those, but I will go back. $250 is a lot of money. And especially if you buy them in a pair. Only guys like you, Dwight, and Stewart, who makes big money, can afford that. That's a joke. But
the one thing about using it, that use case is probably not something that Apple intended.
Correct.
And at the $300 price point, if you're in a small apartment and you don't have the cash to spend on a full pair, it's probably a decent experience audio wise. One of the problems, I think, when we were doing the press, the reviewers who were doing this, working with the HomePods, met with Apple, and in one of the conversations, I asked the question about, I use an Apple TV 4K on a Sony Bravia 4K TV, and it uses the Google TV interface, which is a fine interface. If you're not, I'm very invested in the Apple ecosystem, so I always use an Apple TV 4K. And I asked them if it was possible at all to use the HomePods with another platform for home audio, home theater. No, you can't. And so I think there's a very, Apple typically kind of niches out its hardware. You have to use it in their ecosystem. And one of the interesting things I think that's coming in the future, and I'm going to write a second HomePod column soon, is that these are now Matter enabled.
Yes.
And the Apple TV 4K is Matter enabled. The second generation of the 4K, the third generation of the 4K, which is the newest one from 2022, also uses Thread, which is the wireless protocol with Matter.
Right.
But I think what Apple is doing is setting up the HomePods as voice control for a growing ecosystem, now that they'll be able to take advantage of any Matter-enabled smart home device. So I think there's kind of a Trojan horse to a certain extent in this, in that I think the HomePods will get more and more capabilities over time as they relate to Matter.
It's interesting, Stewart, is that it was kind of surprising when Apple opened up the kimono on these new HomePods, because the original HomePods, they pretty much said they were done in that large format form factor. And of course, hey, they didn't have to ask our permission. They just changed their mind and said, by the way, we're coming out with this new version. What are your thoughts on their HomePods? And I think Dwight makes a great point. My usage model is very narrow, and there's other capable speakers that service that. But what's your perspective?
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. The first thought is, and I agree with Dwight, they probably should have been sold in pairs, because the way that they're marketing them, at least, is more of a sound device than as a smart speaker device. In other words, the first generation of smart speakers was the smart stuff first. Oh, and also it's a good Bluetooth speaker. And I think the more recent generations have been marketed as a speaker that also have smart capabilities in them. And so I think everybody's trying to carve out some space that Sonos has pretty much carved out for itself. When I got the Sonoses for review, they came as a pair. You could buy them separately, but you could also buy them as a pair, which is the way that you really need to get them. And like the new HomePod, they're useless as an individual speaker. You need to get them as a pair. So I think that's the first thing. And I think the reason that a lot of people are leaning in that direction is because you don't really need a smart speaker anymore. My computer has, I'm like Dwight, I'm in the Apple ecosystem, and there's a button right at the top to activate Siri. Her name, I've disconnected all my standalone smart speakers because they wake up by themselves. But, I can get Siri here, and I can get Siri here. I mean, I don't need a smart speaker to get the series. So if I wake up in the morning and I want to have the shades go up, I can, talk to my. So the needs because smart speaker technology or voice control technology is beginning to appear in so many other places, the need for a standalone smart speaker is now resting almost solely upon its audio capabilities. So I'm with Dwight. I'm very surprised that they are not marketing this. Apple's not marketing this much heavier as an Apple Sonos competitor. The Sonos obviously not obviously, maybe people don't know, can be are both Google and Alexa oriented, and now that matters, and that walled garden doesn't matter anymore. I think that's more of a reason why Apple should be trying to promote these as an audio device first as an audio device and then as a smart speaker, as opposed to the other way around.
Well, and I think those are all good points, and we got to move to the next topic. But the one thing I would point out, though, and Dwight, you'll validate this for me. One of my frustrations that now it's coming back to memory is I have the original HomePod upstairs. You cannot use the original HomePod and the new HomePod in a paired configuration. So that kind of was, there's obviously a technical reason for that. Maybe the performance has to be equal in each one, and that's probably the reason why you can't. But that was not. I was not pleased when I learned that. So that was
not only can you not do that, but the HomePod Mini, which was introduced, just before they killed off the large HomePod, won't sync up with the new HomePod. So you can't, like, for example, I got excited about the idea of having, on either side of my TV, these two big HomePods, and then on the tables next to either side of my couch, having a HomePod Mini and essentially having like real surround sound. Nope, can't do it. Can't do it yet, but you might be able to do it in the future. And that's the nice thing about all of these, is that Apple can update them, and bring new capabilities to them.
Let us bring the next topic up here, and we'll bring this right up here. This is going to be a fun one. And I think this is an accurate statement. I mean, ever since ChatGPT came out, there seems to be this incredible, it's almost like a gold rush type of thing. Everybody wants to put AI in their solutions. Everybody wants to incorporate ChatGPT into their products, into their solutions. And we've got to talk about some of the risks here, because, I will say something a bit humorous, is that, I wonder, as professional journalists, are you guys concerned that ChatGPT could put you guys out of business? I know that sounds like a silly statement, but that I think there are people asking that question. So, but let's start with you, Dwight, on the whole ChatGPT topic, because I know you played with it.
Well, what's interesting is that AI has already been used in this way. The Associated Press has been using AI to do one of the most tedious jobs that any business writer faces, and that's writing basic earnings stories.
Right.
And they essentially feed the earnings press release into their AI, and the AI generates a story, an editor cleans it up, and it goes out. And of course, CNET was caught using AI to write stories, and the AI, as is typical of ChatGPT, was inserting errors and what's called hallucinating in this instance. So I'm not, at the moment, I'm not worried about that. The one thing I think it has the potential to do, and this is also true, I think, with education, there's a lot of worry about students using it to cheat. But I think it can make journalists' work better. I've been using it to, like, if I want to do some background in a column, I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll give it a prompt that will say, let's say, talk about the history of Apple's smart speakers. And it'll write kind of this generic story. But what it tends to do, because it has this information in its training, in most cases, it's accurate. I check everything, but it gives me an opportunity to make sure I include everything and I don't forget something when I'm doing background. I throw that away, but it essentially becomes an index, like an outline for the things that I want to do. That saves me a lot of time.
Right.
I would never copy and paste that into place, but it's one way I think that journalists' work can improve using that kind of thing.
Well, but Stewart, I want to get back to one of the points that Dwight made. I wish I had ChatGPT when I was back in college. I had to go to a library, Apps library at Boston College, where I went to school, and you know the drill because you guys are in the same age ballpark that I'm in, and it doesn't bother me that students would leverage the tool, because I think that if the tool could be leveraged and you are forced to read through the copy to make sure that you validate all the data that comes through, that should be obvious. That could be a good thing. And now you could argue too that, and by the way, ChatGPT does some of this, is that if you try to do a cut and paste, there can be signature tools that can be put in place so a professor knows whether someone did that and they didn't do their homework in terms of managing the content. There's also an issue of, if you ask the identical question on different sessions, will you get an identical answer? That can vary depending on what algorithms are being updated. But what's your perspective in terms of just using that and some of the practicality issues that come into play?
Well, I agree with you on the educational side. As long as it's used as an educational tool, I mean, I played with it a little myself, and I was bemused by its answer to my question about whether or not it was sentient or not. Of course, it said it was not, but wouldn't that what a sentient being would say if it didn't want you to know that it was sentient? My major concern about this is all part of the larger topic of digital fake. It's the deep fakes, it's the digital image manipulation, anything that it can be done in the digital domain that is designed to replicate what real people do in real life. And I think this all fits into that much larger issue. For instance, there's a huge problem in the art world and the graphics world of AI machines churning out illustrations in the styles of particular artists. And those artists are actually being financially impacted because publications or book publishers who need an illustration in the style of an artist simply feed that information. They get an illustration without having to pay the artist who originated the style to begin with. So there's, I think, a much larger problem of passing off digital AI generated content of any sort as real life content.
Yes. Pass it off as real.
What needs to be done is some sort of overarching watermarking system, whether it's a self-regulating within the industry or something that legislatures have to get involved in. But I think we're going to have to start looking at it some way of watermarking digitally generated content of any kind. So the person looking at it knows whether or not a machine generated this or a human being generated it. And as the processing power increases, which it will, and as the usage increases, and as the shall we say, the negative usage of it increases, and of course this will be put to very bad usages. It just will, because that's how the history of technology rolls. Every time you come out with a technology that is, for the good, ends up being misused by somebody. So I think that like in all things, we should be acting proactively to make sure that we have these sort of negative outcomes covered. It will wait till something really awful happens before anybody takes any real action.
Well, and Dwight, I think Stewart's got a good point here, and I suspect that you agree. But there should be some type of code of conduct that companies have to agree to, so whether there is a computer behind the scenes in terms of generating this content. Going to be tough. I certainly think news publications should do that, and to the point you made earlier in terms of, those really dry, kind of rinse and repeat activities like repeating, generating content around earnings announcements. Sure, that's probably something that's pretty easy because it's very quantitative, and that can be fairly easily done. But do you think there should be some type of code of conduct thing that people should, companies should sign up to make sure that they're disclosing where the content's coming from?
I think that to a certain extent, if journalism organizations do this already, this is in their, they want to credit the source of everything. So if something comes from an AI, typically it's said. One of the most interesting uses I've seen of it, Casey Newton's platform or newsletter, he has started using AI generated art at the top of every newsletter. it's an illustration. It's not intended to be like a real life image. And he credits it. And I'm not sure he's doing this, but for a while he was actually putting the prompt, what the prompt was that generated that image. I'm real interested in that. I would love to see kind of disclosure on the prompt that is used to generate these things. And what's actually has started happening in the art world is that the ability to write a prompt that gets what you want has become an art form in itself. There are people who will now teach you how to write a good AI prompt. So, it's already like spinning off new niches for jobs and consultants. You will have good and you will have bad. That happens with everything in society, not just technology. That every development, the invention of the automobile takes you from point A to point B, but quickly, but it pollutes the environment and it causes a lot of deaths every year. That's
trade-off, right?
Right. And I think that is, that's what's going to happen with this. There already are lawsuits involving the artists that you were talking about. Apple announced that it was doing audiobooks with AI voices, and essentially it's the same voices with Siri, and they are training the AI on fiction and nonfiction, and authors are up in arms because there was no consent. Well, actually, that's not true. There was one particular publisher had in their contract with the author that their work could be used to train AIs. And it's kind of like buried down in there. And these authors are very upset about that. So I think that you'll have a lot of litigation. I suspect litigation will move faster than legislation because, that's usually how it works. But eventually regulation will happen.
Yeah, and we've got to move to the next topic, but this has been a bone of contention that Stewart has brought up many, many times. It just seems that good old Washington, God bless our legislators on both sides of the aisle. They just don't have a technological bent. Their staffs might because they're all 25, but when I hear these hearings and my head wants.
And the Supreme Court on the section.
Yeah, well, at least they acknowledge it.
They're openly admitting they have no background to make any decision on this.
No. But at least they're acknowledging that publicly,
right.
Which I got to give them credit for.
Right.
And I am sure we will talk about this issue once again, but let me bring up the next topic here for us to tackle. Now, Dwight, maybe Stu and I will talk about this for the most part, but I think you'll be able to chime in on this, is that Intel just launched an app called Unison, that the dream of this app is to create a comparable Windows experience, an Apple ecosystem experience with Windows PCs, primarily focused on bridging that gap that's existed for years with text messaging. As maybe some people don't know this, but if you've got a Windows PC, there are no apps that allow you to natively, run an Apple iMessages capability. So I can type text messages from my desktop PC or from my portable, which, by the way, is the one feature that keeps me in the Apple ecosystem, even though Windows PCs tend to be more and more affordable. And we can talk about performance on and off, but most of the applications on Windows and Mac OS are available on the side. But Apple just will not relinquish that. They just came out with this Intel Unison app, which I it wasn't really a review, but I provided some commentary on Tech News World early in the week, and it's a work in progress to say the best. It does allow you to send text messages once you pair your phone with it, but it's got some really interesting side effects. If I close the app, I lose all the text messages. In fact, you can't even delete a text message once you send it. It's got a lot of compromises, so it's kind of a half step forward. But let me start with Stewart. I guess the question is, do you ever think Apple will really open up the kimono, because they're really the company that really has to allow Microsoft, really Microsoft, although Intel is the company that we're talking about here, is they really have to provide the AI API support so you could have a really robust experience. It can be done. It's just a business decision that Apple has made to keep people in the ecosystem. Stewart, so what are your thoughts on this?
There's no reason for Apple to change their stance on this. I mean, I've been thinking about this in context of Matter. And I think that Apple had to, quote unquote, open up its kimono on Matter the same way that Google and Alexa did, simply because the smart home market was getting to the point where nobody was getting anywhere, simply because of all these walled gardens. In the world of computing, it's the evolution of the ecosystems has been completely different than it has been on the smart home. So you have Android, you have iOS, and you have Windows, which are these three major dominating architectures that have each grown up in their own ecosystems, developed their own ecosystems, developed completely separately. But unlike the smart home market, the PC and phone world, even though sales have dipped considerably in the cell phone world, the use of the operating systems have not dimmed. In fact, it's the operating systems and their walled garden nature that are keeping some of the hardware players in business. It is. I don't see how it's to Androids, Apple's, or even Windows benefits to open up their ecosystems to the other players the way the smart home systems have with Alexa, Google, and Siri, because their hardware is just too tied into it, where on the smart home side, you don't have that you don't have that one-to-one hardware operating system relationship as you do in the computer and the cell phone business, which are much larger by huge factors than the smart home business. So I don't see them any of the big three opening up their kimono, which is why Intel is doing it. Notice it's Intel. It's not Microsoft. It's not Android or Google, and it's not Apple. It's a third party intervening. And the only reason, obviously, that they can is because they're such a big chip maker. And perhaps Intel is even doing it to sort of bolster its chip business, which has undergone quite a bit of competition over the years, especially since they lost Apple as a customer. So I can't see a world that where anybody would open them up, because it would too endanger. Those ecosystems are just too critical to their advantages on the hardware side.
No, I think you're right, Stewart. And Dwight, I guess I'd like to get your 2 cents on this, because you are an Apple ecosystem type of guy, but you've obviously have lots of experience on the Windows side as well. I just think that once you start typing a text message on your desktop or on your portable with a real keyboard, not to say, some people like touch screens and they can manage with that, but I find I'm much more productive with a keyboard. And when I show that to people saying, hey, here's a Mac, if you've never used a MacBook before, there are a lot of people out there that have never used a Mac, or they're Windows folks, and their eyes open up saying, this is a wonderful experience to be able to use a real keyboard. You think that's a big enough feature for people, to switch? Or do you think that, to Stewart's point, you think that, hey, you know what, Apple doesn't really have any reason, because, their market share is only in that 15-20% range with MacBooks, although it has been growing larger. Microsoft is still the lion's share player from an operating system standpoint. And, what's your thoughts?
I read your analysis on this product, and I agree with a lot of it. I mean, you talk in it about the fact that players like Dell have created kind of their own version of this to
Yes.
greater or lesser extent. One of the other thing that's interesting is that smartphone companies, like particularly Samsung, when you set up a new Samsung device, I'm reviewing the Galaxy S23 Ultra, and when you set it up, it invites you to link your PC or your Mac to the phone. So they're kind of working at it, piecemeal. And there are plenty of third-party Windows apps that let you type into a text message, connect to your phone, and type to it. But there's nothing that kind of unifies all of it. You don't get anything like on a Mac. I can find something that I am interested in on my phone and copy it, and then paste it into a document on my Mac, and it's seamless. It just happens. And there's nothing like that. If Intel can do something like that works across all of the platforms, that would be pretty spectacular.
But it's interesting. Stewart brought up the Dell. the Dell solution and the Intel solution are based on Screenovate, which is an Israeli company that Intel had to acquire. So it's not Intel technology; it's a third-party company that they
most of
purchased.
these, referring to what Dwight said, for instance, if you are on a text stream, a text conversation on an iPhone, and you want to take yourself out of it, you can only delete yourself from a group text if everybody is on an iPhone or an iOS device. If there are any green bubbles in your group text thread, you cannot delete yourself from it. So that, that might be one area where they may be able, the ecosystems may be able to come together just for that one function, because that would be in Apple's interest. But opening their kimono, as you put it, to allow other people into their OS to do certain things, I just can't see the advantages of it for Apple, simply because they would lose their primary sales tool.
No, I don't see that either. I mean, I want to move to our last topic, but the only thing I can think of is that if Microsoft and Intel went to Apple and says, we're going to give you the deal of the century and we're going to pay you some type of royalty, so you're going to make so much money because of our volume on Windows that it probably could be a business. I could see Apple say, well, the business upside from a revenue standpoint is so significant. I doubt, margins are so slim right now.
So in other words, you're thinking that Intel should bribe Apple.
That's a word that you're using.
and Mark, that will never happen.
I know it will never happen. But hey, listen, I could also say the Mets are never going to never win the World Series, but I know that would offend Stewart. Let's hit the last topic here. This will be a fun one too. President Biden, good old President Biden. He's upholding this Apple Watch ban, it looks like, and I have my own opinions about that. Stewart, this was a topic that you wanted to discuss, so I'm going to let you kind of opine on that, get your view.
Well, first of all, I don't think President Biden even looked at this, and if he did, he had no idea what he was looking at.
No, that's not true.
I mean, this is simply a policy move, because this is something from the ITC. And so I think this is a pure political thing. I don't think this has anything to do with placating or angering Tim Cook or interfering with patent suits. I think this is purely an international political foreign policy move more than anything else. The second part, I think it's getting a lot more headlines than is probably warranted, which is why I wanted to bring it up, because I think it is one of those things that the press likes to blow up, but actually doesn't mean anything. Right. More than likely, how this is going to play out is that AirCore, the company in question is AirCore, and apparently they came up with an ECG, an electrocardiogram technology that has been used in Apple Watches since the Series 4. Yes. And so they sued Apple for patent infringement, because Apple apparently had looked at what AirCore had been doing and knew what they were doing. So it looks like, just to my eyes and the way that I've read this thing, it looks like, that Apple may have fudged things a little bit. Usually what Apple does is what you mentioned that Intel did. They buy the company to buy the technology. And I think,
and that's what, by the way, that's what this ultimately, this is what may actually happen, is that
right. AirCore is a very small company, and more than likely Apple will come to some sort of licensing agreement with us, and this whole thing will wash away. But this happens, but the fact that the president's name on it, and that he's even involved in this, has, I think, blown this story more out of proportion than it probably needs to be. Nobody is going to not be able to buy an Apple Watch. What will happen is the two companies will come together, the lawyers will figure something out, and all of this will be forgotten in a couple of weeks, if it's not forgotten already. It's just that it got played up in the media so much that I just felt it's much ado about nothing, essentially. This is patent infringement, two companies coming together, figuring out how to not infringe anymore, somebody getting paid off Tuesday in the tech industry.
So, Dwight, your thoughts? Is this kind of all do about nothing?
Well, yes. And, the reason why Biden is involved is because the structure of the government is such that the office of the president is the final arbiter on an ITC decision. So it could be, any president sitting there at the moment at the time. And and he looks at recommendations from staff, and he looks. There have been legal rulings on this from the ITC, and the ITC has kind of held firm on it. And it could be that the Air Corps is correct.
Right.
And so I agree. I think what'll ultimately happen, rather than Apple saying it can't sell the Apple Watch in the United States anymore, that's ridiculous. They will pay off Air Corps, but it's also possible that there will be in future Apple Watches a different system for doing this. There'll be a different technology. It'll look the same to the user, but the hardware and the software.
That's a great point, right? Apple has done that over and over again. Is that if there's an infringement, they either buy the company or use the phrase "pay off."
Right.
But normally, what will happen is that I don't know what the number might be to make these guys go away, but it's not going to be a big number relative to the cash that Apple has, kind of stored away here. But I suspect this is all about nothing, to use an old Jerry Seinfeld phrase. But guys, that's all the time we have today. Let me just bring up some information here. Thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, thanks for making the Smart Tech Check podcast part of your day or commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mark Vina Tech Guys. Thanks, guys, and until next time, have a great week.